time once again to raise our voices together in harmony. It's the venerable model 1260, the Sovereign. It's a ladder-braced big boy for the budget-conscious player. This one gives some indication that it's from the late 60s. There isn't a date stamp visible through the sound hole, but we'll have a look inside later. Sometimes they're stamped on the top rather than the back. This is very much your typical harmony. If it's lasted this long and hasn't had a neck reset, odds are pretty good it's going to need one. Action was probably on the high side when they left the factory, and time has a way. The action on this one is not too terribly bad, but there's absolutely no saddle left. And in fact, the high E string has been pushed into a slot that was sawn into it, so it's basically on top of the wood. Likely to keep the string from moving back and forth too much because there's no downward pressure on it anymore. You know, no saddle, decent action. Those things, when they appear together, can be kind of frustrating because it's not hard to play, but it won't sound very good at all if you do play it. And then you got to spend a bunch of money. As luck would have it, the rest of the guitar is in pretty nice shape. The piece of wood used for the soundboard is absolutely fantastic. This is old-growth Sitka spruce with a grain count and a quality you don't see very much these days. The frets are in nice condition. It looks like this received service someplace in the not-too-distant past. One little thing gives me some pause, and that's this spot of touch-up on the very end of the heel. This is in a location where you wouldn't normally put a strap button, but you might if you wanted to put a screw through into the neck block. And it seems like there could be some glue stuck down in a crack between the heel and the body. Another thing I noticed is that there is polishing compound stuck in some of the depressed grain lines along the neck. Between the rivulets of brownish red glue there on the end block, you can see a hole which might be drilled right through from the heel, which again leads me to suspect there could be a hidden screw. 15 or 20 years ago, the idea of resetting the neck on one of these made virtually no sense at all, financially. There's just too big a disparity between the market value and the cost of the repair. But now, a $500 repair investment seems okay, because these guitars have come up in price. They're made of good materials, and they were put together very fast, but usually the measurements are okay. They can be made to play in tune. And if you like a ladder-braced sound, Bob's your uncle. I think they sound really good if you're into open tunings. Something with a drop D just feels really at home on these guitars. So the action, like I said, it's not outrageous. It's about 5.5 64ths, which is about 85 thousandths, which is about 2 millimeters, both treble and bass, which is okay. I'd like it lower on the treble, to be honest. The bass is fine. As far as relief is concerned, this is a very straight neck. There is no relief. The string have a capo on the first fret and I'm depressing it at the body joint like I usually do. There is no space between it and the top of the fret, which is okay, assuming the neck itself is very straight. If there's a bit of a back bow, that could present a bit of an issue. So I usually like to see a little bit of relief there, just so that I'm convinced that there isn't a back bow. Flathead screws. Harmony was using them into the 1970s, long after everyone else had switched over to Phillips head. They probably bought, you know, 1 million of them in 1946 and never had reason to change. So, Harmony truss rods. This model has an adjustable rod, which is good. They did from the late 50s for the Sovereigns. Much of the Harmony line didn't, though. They might have a non-adjustable reinforcing bar, but even the ones with the truss rod, you should be very careful adjusting them. It's not the strongest design, and over-tightening these is like guaranteed automatic break. Or sometimes the rather chunky cylindrical washer that the nut bears against will compress into the wood and do nothing. If you do break one, it's not a very easy thing to remove either. And if you happen to leave them installed in their broken state, they tend to be very noisy. They'll create a terrible buzz, so don't let that happen. So this is a wee little 1/4 inch nut threaded onto a bar that's like 1/8 of an inch thick. So I'm just going to loosen that off about 1/8 of a turn or so and see what happens. Okay, so now we have the barest tiny little bit of clearance between the fret and the string. There's maybe 0.02 of an inch. The owner would like to know if this is the original nut. To start off with, it's narrower than the end of the fretboard, which of course can happen with harmonies because they were working fast and sort of popping whatever they had in place. But if it is factory, it's the nicest harmony nut I've ever seen in terms of its construction. Usually they're quite tall and they'll have really deep slots for the strings. The other thing I'm noticing though is that it seems to be held away from the fretboard. There's a considerable gap here on the treble side, which can often happen if you've got residual glue sticking to it. We're going to clean that out and make sure that this actually aligns, because this could be moving us out maybe 1.5 millimeters and changing the string length, which can affect tuning. In terms of slot depth though, it's actually really good, which again leads me to suspect someone spent some time setting this thing up. Okay, before I try and pull the neck off, let's see what's going on here. Now, there shouldn't be any metal at the end of a harmony heel unless it's been messed with. And that suggests that there is some metal in there. So first job is to excavate. I'm not wild about the placement. I wish they'd put it maybe 1/4 of an inch lower. That would have actually gone through the dovetail itself. And it feels like it's too close to the end cap. And this appears to be something like epoxy, so there's apt to be a bit of carving involved. Okay, I'm encountering a light colored end grain, which would suggest something like a maple dowel. Let's see if I can drill it out. Got a 5mm drill bit here, which is a brad point, slightly smaller than the dowel. It's a size I don't often use, so it won't feel too bad if it gets destroyed during this procedure. Now I have to enlarge the screw hole because it's not big enough to let the screw head out yet. This is tricky business. Still not quite big enough. Coming in with a micro chisel here, I can see a difference between the color of the maple dowel and the brownish mahogany neck. I'll try and peel that back as far as I can go. I don't want to put too much torque on the screw because heaven forbid I strip it out and it's sunk 1/2 inch into this heel. Well, I'm looking at what is either a very stripped out Phillips head, or if I'm lucky, and the guitar's lucky it came to a Canadian household, that could be a Robertson No. 1, the green handle screwdriver. I'm going to hope it's Robertson, because if that's Phillips, then I'm probably going to have to get the old screw extractor out. The Robertson driver fits in there really nicely. Of course, it's been glued in place. Probably use the same hole diameter in the heel as in the body, which is not the way screws work. I know this is crazy, but it's so tight I'm going to spritz a little bit of liquid wrench in there. And in a case like this, they're really lucky they didn't crack the heel. I don't want to carve away too much of this heel if I don't have to. Oh no, it's working. Hello, pan head Robertson screw. Yeah. Okay. And now I'm going to take my usual measurement with a straight edge on the top of the frets the guitar is at full string tension, standard pitch, and measure the clearance at the front edge of the bridge between the soundboard and the underside of the straight edge. This happens to be 3/16 of an inch. This is my way of ascertaining what the soundboard actually does under string tension. With a ladder brace guitar, there can be a lot of flexion that goes on in front of the bridge, and this lets me know. So I'll detune now. Okay, with the strings totally slackened off, I'll take the same measurement in the same place. And wowzers, it's more than 1/4 of an inch. So there's a significant increase in height. Sort of like 3/32 of an inch, which means that this soundboard dips by that much under string tension. And going down the line, actually when I look at the projection of the fret tops, it's pretty darn close to the top or the height of this bridge, which is what you would normally expect to see in a brand new guitar for something with a saddle height that we'd consider normal. That means that I'm going to have to add 3/32 to whatever height I want the saddle to be. It'd be quite a tall saddle to begin with. Another thing I'm noticing here is kind of leading me to suspect this has had some kind of neck reset in the past. The fingerboard extension dips. There's a lot of fall away towards the sound hole, which would happen if you've corrected the neck angle and then pushed this down to meet it. The other thing is, this is exceptionally clean on this area here. Very pristine and white compared to the dingy sort of amber color which you'll find over the rest of the neck. So I might not be the first person. These ferrules or grommets on the tuners of a harmony are always loose, and they will go missing during this reset procedure if you don't hold them in place. So either use a rubber band or just a convenient cutoff of string threaded through to keep them on the guitar. Unfortunately, I can't find a date code anywhere on the top or the back, or the sides for that matter. There is evidence though of this brace, which has been re-glued using what seems to be a polyurethane adhesive like Gorilla Glue, and that's not the one to choose. Virtually anything else would be better. You know, if you don't want to go to the trouble of using hide glue or fish glue, yellow woodworking glue would be okay. But this stuff is such a mess, and it's really hard to deal with if it has to be re-glued. Okay, suspecting this neck has come off previously, and seeing polyurethane glue on the interior of the guitar makes me worried, because that stuff can stand up to a whole lot of heat. And it's virtually waterproof. So we're just going to hope that they were sensible and used something else for this. Here I'm using my fret pulling pliers to remove the 15th fret. Interestingly, I don't see any access hole for a steam needle or other heating device, though I suppose it could have gone through the hole that was drilled in the end of the heel, or even under the heel cap. Some people have done that in the past as well. These are foam cutters from hotwirefoamfactory.com. I have to say it every time, otherwise someone's going to ask me. Sometimes on these guys I don't feel it's necessary to use the neck press. This one was loose enough at the end of the heel. And it came out without complaint. Okay, we got some chunks of shim. Evidence of a bunch of glue squished down at the end of the heel here in an attempt to snug it up. But other than that, pretty clean. Unfortunately, no date on the end of the heel. In the pocket there's a mixture of old hide glue and younger woodworking adhesive, a carpenter's glue. Got to clean that all out of there. The thing is, with the glue cleaned out and the ability to press the heel firmly up against the body, this doesn't require very much change to the angle at all. It's essentially overset. So I'm just taking a couple of quick passes to better meld the heel profile with the sides by pulling the sandpaper through it. With the heel off the body, I can easily replug with a new piece of dowel and leave the screw out of the equation this time. I want a good solid fit between the dovetail and its pocket, so I'm furring out its sides using some strips of mahogany veneer clamped in place with these purpose-built cawls. I'll tap the nut loose. Looking at this thing, I'm actually convinced that this is the original nut. In fact, this is the first time it's come off. It just wasn't particularly well fit. It was actually being held away from the end of the board by the cylindrical truss rod stop, which is protruding slightly. In an effort to tidy up the glue along the sides of the brace and near its end, I got in there with a chisel and scraped and scraped. I'll remove the bulk of the dowel's protrusion using a sharp carving knife. To fill the odd gaps around the dowel, I use some epoxy putty. Once that's dry, I'll attack it with some 220 grit sandpaper on a flat block. It seems strange, but usually for these curved surfaces, a flat block is the best way to fare them into each other and get a consistent result. With a thicker dovetail, there's a lot of room for maneuvering. You can see how loose the end of the heel is in the pocket now. This is a flat sanding stick with beveled edges, which fits in nicely into the dovetail area. And I can use that to remove a judicious amount from both sides and sneak up on a tight fit. As I get closer, the amount of wobble continues to get smaller and smaller. Eventually, I refine it to the point where I can't pull the heel away from the sides at all. It's locked in there very solid. Here's my fingerboard extension shim. I'll plane it to the correct thickness and then taper it. With a combination of transparent brown lacquer and some powdered pigment stains, I can get the dowel to visually disappear. It's time to glue the neck back on. I've got one clamp for the dovetail proper, then several more to hold the fingerboard extension down. Those are being supported by a clamping cawl on the inside, so that I'm not marring up the transverse brace that's above the sound hole. And yeah, it doesn't take a whole lot of pressure. Things fit pretty well. It stays in clamps for a full day, then I can reinstall the 15th fret. All sovereigns require polishing from time to time. Here's a characteristic of original untouched fingerboards. They certainly didn't use tape to protect them at the factory. They all have this intense cross-grained scratch pattern from quite heavy sandpaper or other abrasives. It's virtually impossible to make this go away in an elegant fashion without a refret. And so another harmony gets a new lease on life. The saddle height provides a lot more break angle for the strings. It's as tall as you'd ever want it to be because these saddles are quite narrow in comparison to other guitars of the period. At 80 thousandths of an inch or 2 millimeters, they're thinner than a Martin. Again, with a saddle this tall in a through-style bridge, where the ends are exposed, it's important to glue it in place. Otherwise, the leverage of the strings could snap off the front of the bridge, which makes playing less fun. The touch-up on the area of the dowel was fairly successful. I'll put some strings on this thing and we'll hear how it sounds.